Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Mindful Place Summit. I have a very special guest for you today. His name is Claude Stevens. He's the facilitator of outreach and regenerative design at Bernheim Arboretum and Research Forest in Claremont, Kentucky. He's also the director of the Children's at Play Network, which is an ongoing project of Bernheim focused on working regionally to re-envision the landscapes for children's play. The CAPN values play as a part of their healthy child development and as means to reconnect children with nature in order to foster the next generation of environmental stewards. Welcome, Claude.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm just absolutely inspired by the work that you do, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about your project. And if we could just start with, why did Bernheim, which is an organization focused on conservation and preservation of the natural world, why would they put so much energy behind play?
That's a great question. So a little bit of background about what Bernheim is, first of all. So we're located in Claremont, you mentioned that, but that's south of Louisville, Kentucky, where they hold the Kentucky Derby, by about 30 miles. And we are a private nonprofit. And in terms of physical size, we're huge. We're 16,000 plus acres. That's 25 square miles. I can't put it into hectares for you. Sorry about that. I'm American. But our work is in conservation. So we protect forests and streams and wetlands and grasslands. And our mission is to connect people with nature. So why play? So about 10 years ago, we began questioning what is our role. We're one of those places that schools come for field trips and those kinds of things. And we have a strong and valuable background in doing the kinds of programs that schools typically think of for museums and gardens and zoos and those kinds of places, which is a group of students come and then they get off of the bus and we do something with them, and then they go back home. And for years, what we did was we put them into another classroom. It was an outdoor classroom, and we talked about natural world issues, but it was still a classroom. They're still in a group of 30. They're still learning things that the curriculum says are important to them. So we questioned that. We didn't throw it out, but we added to that this layer of play because we feel like the most important job that we can do before we teach them about ecosystems or trophic levels or photosynthesis, the most important thing is that the children love nature. And so the best way to do that is to approach that through the child mind, which is play-based. And that goes back through our entire evolutionary history. So 3.5 million years, and we can get into that if you want. Our brains have evolved to learn through play in the outdoors. So when we try to fight against that, we're fighting against our nature. And so we began experimenting with play because we feel like the most valuable thing that we can do is to allow children to explore and play in the natural world. So we started doing that. That evolved into the Children at Play initiative, which then evolved into the Children at Play network. So we're working within our large region, and we really have no boundaries. We're talking to you today in British Columbia, but we feel like through play, we are building the next generation of environmental stewards. So we're setting the stage for children that love being in nature through play.
I absolutely love that. And, you know, I think back to my childhood. It was like, you don't come home till it's dark. I came home dirty from head to toe, right? But the learning that came along with it and being in the forest, being in nature, you know, at now my age, reconnecting with that piece of my childhood and the joy and the wonder and understanding how that really shaped me today. And I feel like that it's missing, you know, especially in the urban maybe in the urban cities, or, you know, especially what's happening right now in the world, where we are all just in our own little bubbles, but expanding that out, getting out into nature and connecting, you know, reading about, you know, I'm like, I want to come down and you see your forest, you know, or see what's going on down there. And maybe one day I can come and share that
Well,
piece.
you're
But
welcome.
yeah,
You know, something that you mentioned is being outside and don't come home until it's dark. Well, what's implied in that is you're off on your own. And in today's world, children are directed. They're told how to play, when to play, where to play, what the rules of engagement are, and then somebody steps in and smooths over any of the rough spots in any of that. So if you think of play as having a spectrum from very directed play, so that's what I just described, where everything is handed to the player, to the other end of the spectrum, which is free play, where the child makes the decision. It doesn't have to be a child, we play too, but the player makes the decision on what they do. That's a spectrum. And we have shoved everything over here to that directed end of the spectrum. And part of the role of educators that are play-based and organizations that are champions of play is to not let that go, but to start working on the other side of that spectrum, so that somewhere in the middle, children have the ability to do directed play or free play. So we're bringing more diversity to the play landscape, just like a conservationist would protect diversity in the natural environment, but the biological diversity and the diversity of different types of habitats and ecosystems, that makes a healthy world. Looking at play as an analogy from agriculture, if all play environments were like cornfields, every single cornfield looks exactly the same, well then we haven't built a diversity of play opportunities for children. We need to build playgrounds that are more like gardens, where there's all kinds of different opportunities and things.
absolutely.
So we're returning diversity both in the types of play and the environments for play. And that's part of the work of the Children at Play Network.
I love that. The world and the children, and we all need this work. So really, really appreciate you sharing this with us. So your mission states that you work at the community level. Can you tell us how and why you do that?
Well, absolutely. So there are lots of individual organizations that are organization focused. So lots of zoos and gardens and individual schools and individual homes, families are of their own volition and their own design, they're creating wonderful play environments. But those become islands. And if we don't start connecting those islands of practice together to build a network of thought and practice, then we're not really building a healthy system. We're building a healthy piece of a system. And so at Bernheim, we're systems biologists. We look at how systems fit together, mostly ecological systems, but that's a model for all systems. So we figured that if we do not start building the resources that pull together all of those individual elements into a network, then we're not really building a regenerative system. So sustainability is kind of a catchphrase that everyone uses, but that's really being less bad. So you can think of all those individual efforts to be good as sustainable efforts. But until you network all those sustainable efforts together, it's not a regenerative network like nature. So nature is the model for regenerative systems. So we feel like we're in a good place. We're people that understand how those systems fit together. So we work in urban areas. A part of the Children at Play Network we call Seeds for Urban Play. And that's where we go into communities, and we do not go into those communities with a solution. we go into those communities to build a relationship. And then what we do next depends on the relationship. So we say that we do 5 things when we go and work with someone outside of the Children at Play network. We build relationships, we build relationships, we build relationships, we build relationships, and then if the relationship is strong, we start talking about programs and services and the actions that we might take based on those relationships. So it's not, here's the answer to your problem, it's let's be partners. What are your challenges? What kinds of things do you think would be important for your community, from your perspective? How can we then cooperate to answer your thinking around what would improve your community around play?
I love that. Absolutely. Oh, when you speak, I get goosebumps. I'm like, oh, there's so much here. Thank you. Can you tell us more about the 10-acre play environment? I'm very excited about this.
So yes, so that goes back to what I was just talking about. What we found when we were going into outside of our community to other people, and so who is that? That's early learning communities and elementary schools and parks and recreation departments and other nonprofit organizations and for-profit organizations. Anybody out there that has any interest in dealing with children through play can be part of this community. And so one of the things that we found out is that there's a lot of interest in building new natural playgrounds, but there's not a lot of knowledge around that. And there are not, in our part of the world, there's not a lot of great examples. So for 5 years, we did things like go to them and say, what conditions do you have to meet? And what are the rules of engagement between you and your children? What state rules and federal rules are there and guidelines that you need to address? And what are the budgetary constraints? And what are all these different things that you need to think about if you're going to make some kind of change? And we put all of that thinking together in the build out of a new 10-acre playground at Bernheim. So that's a lot of land. So we are building 3 separate zones, and we are hoping that somewhere in that spectrum of play zones is something that will address you. Maybe it's the whole thing, but maybe it's just a piece of it. So our first zone is a natural playground area where it's mostly the kinds of things that you might find in an elementary school or a preschool or an early learning environment. The second phase is more adventure play, where you can build things with loose parts, and it's a little bit more risk. And then the third area is a woodland area, and that's for exploration play. So it's nature play, adventure play, exploration play. And so we're designing a very diverse play environment so that we can use it as a tool to help other people take their next step in their journey to create better play environments.
That is so beautiful. The world and our children need more of this, and I'm getting excited. I'm like, I keep saying, I'm like, I want to come and play, and that educator inside of me, seeing and hearing what the work that you and the team are doing allows me to also get that inspiration and incorporate certain things into our playground. And the joy and wonder of that discovery with the natural products is such a shift. And sharing a bit about your why and how did you come about this?
Well, so I have a personal journey involved in this too. So I am attached to a little 12-year-old girl. Ruby is her name. And 12 years ago, when she was still in the womb, I began questioning what would my role be as a caregiver of a young person in the modern world. So I started looking into play. there was one pivotal moment. I tossed a magazine that I subscribed to called Yes Magazine, and I just tossed it down on the table, and on the back cover was a photograph of a 3-year-old Inuit child who was fishing on the edge of an Arctic ice floe. She was hand casting a line, fishing for Arctic char. I dug into that photograph, and it kind of changed my thinking. Like, well, here's a 3-year-old child fishing, because that's part of her cultural norm.
Yeah.
That started me on this journey of looking into what is normal for humans. That now, my background in terms of education is I'm an evolutionary ecologist. So to break that down into easy terms, we look at how things are at time A and how things are at time B and how did they get from A to B. Well, play is in that same spectrum. So humans, as a species, almost all of our evolutionary history is in groups of people that were nomadic as hunter-gatherers. And as we were hunter-gatherers, there were no schools. Children were kind of shoved to the edges of the current tribal community where they taught themselves through play. Now, what was the play? They were playing at the things that they saw the adults doing. So they played at shelter making. They played at food procurement. They played at social structures. They played at power structures and relationships. They played at communication. They did all of this play. No one taught them anything. And through that play, they became valuable members of their community. And so I think that's a way that we can approach play to bring us back into the way our brains were built. So that's millions of years of brain development that created the way we want to learn, the way we're developed to learn is through play. In the modern era, we have kind of discounted a lot of that play. We talk about play as a toss-off, as frivolous, as what you do when you don't have time to do the important work of learning. But play is learning. So we've put this emphasis on cognitive-based development, and we have de-emphasized that play-based aspect of development. But the child, the mind that's developing for a child is got cognitive skills and social and emotional and physical skills, and play kind of brings balance back to that whole set of human intelligences. It brings us back to who we are as a species.
Yeah, and bringing back to the roots, like you said, the hunter and the gatherer, and it's almost like a full circle of my experience of being out and living up north and being in the forest and learning and doing the fishing and doing the grouse hunting on the back roads and stuff with my dad, and then coming and living and raising my children in more of an urban city center. And then it's like that calling inside, and within my program with the nature base, it's like I'm going back to my roots and hearing your story. It's just like reassures and gives me that trust that it's like there's a natural pull, there's that natural calling to come back to that roots, and creating the environment for our future generation, like you say, for these environmental stewardess. It's like they're stewards. It's like they are the future, and to have them understand this base, this foundation, this knowing is just super, super crucial to the future development. So hearing that, I keep saying, I just get so excited. And, when we had the opportunity to get on a call together, I really want to share my gratitude, because knowing that there are people like yourself and your team out there putting that first, putting that play-based learning first, and that we can follow and be inspired by that work. It's very important for the early learning years, also for all up into adolescence, when children are bored and they're in the city and they get into trouble, it's like bringing them back out into their roots so that they can learn some of these survival techniques as well, amongst, you know, it could be play, but it's also giving them these techniques that, you know, they might want to learn how to fish and so forth for food in the future. So just absolutely love everything that you've shared today. We will be posting some links on your page here so that our followers and listeners can find more information. Is there anything else you wanted to say to our listeners today?
No, I'm going to assume that a lot of your audience is educators, and I think educators feel compelled to teach. And so we spend 80 or 90% of our time directing children into what to do and how to do, and 10 to 20% of the time observing. And I would just suggest that we should at least occasionally flip that, so that we spend 80, 90, 100% of our time observing how children play and learning from them, because they have as much to teach us as we have to teach them. And then just a minor part of our day as educators, gently guiding into perhaps more appropriate or safer or scaffolding their play so that it is more valuable to them. So
Absolutely.
flip our roles.
Flip it. I love that. Thank you so much for coming to connect with us today, Claude, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.